I'm going to talk to you about the potential impacts of plant pests and diseases on trees and forests in the UK. Blimey, what has happened there? That's completely wrong. I don't know what's going on with that. I don't know whose slides these are, but they're not mine.
Try and talk to Benny now.
Let's go for this one instead.
Yes. Yeah.
There we are.
Okay. Hello, my name's Dan Bebber. I'm going to talk to you about the potential impacts of plant pests and diseases on trees and forests in the UK. Much better. Okay, so the question is, as alluded to by Jonathan yesterday, what fraction of tree productivity are we going to lose to pests and diseases? So we've seen these curves over the last couple of days. So over time, plant some trees, the biomass grows, and it levels off at some point, and that's all very nice. But what happens if we have some fungus or some insect that comes along and attacks the trees and makes them ill and they don't grow so well? Well, we might not get quite such a growth in biomass. Worst case scenario, something turns up and it actually kills all of the trees completely, and there's nothing left and there's no biomass. Okay, so they grow and they get attacked and they die and we're left with nothing. We need to work out what the probabilities of these types of scenarios are using the data that we have available. For some pests and diseases, we have some data. So, Jonathan showed some of the ways we can use microclimate data to estimate growth rates and impacts. But for many, we don't. And that's the job that we have to try and do within our trees. So the big one recently, do you know what? I'm going to go back a couple of slides. Picture in the background, anybody know what it is?
It's the haywain.
It's the haywain, Constable's haywain. At the end, I'm going to ask you why I put that painting on the first slide. Okay, so ash dieback turned up a few years ago. This paper here did an analysis of how it spread across Europe. Turned up, I think, in Poland in the late 90s, and within like 10, 12 years, it spread across the entire continent. The authors totted up the years, how many years the disease has been in different countries and the proportion of dead trees, and they very generously fitted a kind of a sigmoid here about the mortality rate over time. But I would just put a straight line through that, to be honest. But what they're estimating is this particular one disease is going to kill between, let's say, a half and all of the ash trees in the continent. Okay, that's one disease. So just remember that, between half and all trees dead. Okay, one pest. A few years ago, we totted up all of the data for all of the pests and diseases of crops, in this case, globally, and to see how quickly they're spreading, how quickly they're getting to the countries where their host crops exist, that type of thing. There's lots of different ones. There are fungi, there are oomycetes, there are hemiptera. So if you mathematicians in the audience, going to start getting a bit biological. There are acari and bacteria and Thysanoptera and Hymenoptera, all different ones. And things like the fungi and the oomycetes, they're also a bit similar to fungi, are spreading quite rapidly. Other things like viruses, not so quick, but they're coming. They have different numbers of hosts. So some of them have lots and lots, will attack lots and lots of different plants. So the Orthoptera and the Thysanoptera, different insect groups, nematodes have very wide host range. Fungi, a bit more specialist, okay? So you've got lots of different types of organisms attacking lots of different types of plants. Again, this is for crops, but Similar thing for trees. Ash dieback triggered the government into a kind of a stress response on what might happen to trees, and they instigated a thing called the Plant Health Risk Register, PHRR. So that's run by DEFRA. What this does, so experts assess all of the known pests and diseases of crops and trees for their risk of arriving in the UK and how much damage they might do. Okay, so you can go to the PHRR website and you'll see this. You can type in the name of your organism and find out lots and lots of different bits of information about that organism. Okay, currently it lists over 1,400 different pests and diseases of plants. Okay. Within that, there's information about trees. That's what we're going to use. So it gives you information on the geographic range, so lists of countries where the organism is known to be. Gives you lists of the major hosts, so these are all the host plant species that the organism will attack for all of these different groups. And it also assesses uncertainty about where they are and damage they might do. This is the bit we're interested in. Okay, this is an assessment, a qualitative assessment of the risk of three things. Firstly, the likelihood of arrival, the likelihood of spread once it's arrived in the UK, and the impact, the damage that it will do. Okay. It also estimates the value of the resource, the plant resource which is at risk. Okay, so if it's a pest which could attack our really important agricultural crops, it'll get a 5. If it's something that'll attack a little scrubby plant in a nature reserve, it'll probably get a 1 or something. So 1 is low, 5 is high. And they also calculate something called the kind of, well, it's the likelihood times impact. It's a kind of relative risk score. So that, and then there's another one which they multiply by the value at risk as well. We're going to ignore value at risk and pretty much look at the likelihood of arrival and spread and the impact. Okay, and we're going to do some stuff with that. They also give you an unmitigated risk and a mitigated risk. Now, mitigated risk is the risk where the government's taken additional actions to try and prevent the arrival and establishment of this organism in the UK. Okay, so there's a little bit of difference sometimes. So the likelihood, unmitigated likelihood of arrival, in this case is 4, which is pretty high. So it's from 1 to 5, but so 4 is very high risk of arrival. Mitigated, if the government takes additional action, it's only a 2. We're going to stop it from getting in somehow. That could be additional monitoring at ports of things like imports of live plants, that type of stuff. Okay, so you've got these arrival and spread risks. They're kind of indicative, according to the kind of metadata that goes with, indicative of the arrival and spread within the next 5 years. Okay. Impacts, we'll get into what that might mean. Okay, so just to put it into context for you, let's consider a human disease analog for the likelihood of arrival and spread and the impact. Okay, so low likelihood of arrival and spread, something like and low impact on you if you get it, something like Q fever. Anybody heard of Q fever? No, see? So it's pretty rare. Okay, if you get it, don't worry, it's not going to do much to you. You might feel a bit kind of under the weather for a couple of days. It's not going to do much. Common cold, you're going to get them. You're going to get them very regularly. Still not going to do you much damage. Congo tibrovirus, exceptionally rare. Only 3 or 4 people have ever died of it. They were in the Congo. They got unlucky. If you get it, it's going to empty you out. You're going to die. Black Death, it was pretty bad. So back in the Middle Ages, it spread like wildfire and lots of people died. We lost a third of our population. Okay, so that's giving you a kind of an indication of, because you're not going to know what these plant pests are, so I thought I'd put it into context. Okay, here, same thing for the plants, for the tree pests in particular. Right, the Kulsi teak borer. Anybody heard of it? No. It's got a very low chance of arrival in the UK, and if it did arrive, it's not going to do much. We don't grow a lot of teak. Yunnan pine weevil, unlikely to get here and spread, but if it did get here, it would kill the pine trees completely. Lilac root weevil, very highly likely to arrive, but it's not going to do a lot of damage because of its host range. Emerald ash borer, so that gets a 5/5 score, very likely to arrive. If it does, it's going to kill all the ash trees, but they're already dead. So actually, to be honest, it doesn't really matter. So what we're saying is we've got a range of kind of risk and impact scores, right?
But it have a low impact then. Or the ash
Well,
gonna die.
it will kill everything that's left. So you could say it's high impact. Yeah, they haven't adjusted it down yet. Right. So, but this is all qualitative, right? We're not into a quantitative score. So how do we convert that? Okay. So we've got to start thinking about what we've got in the UK in terms of our tree species. So not counting the kind of weird and wonderful things you'll find at Westonbirt Arboretum. About 75 tree species found in the UK. Nice diversity we've got here. Species will include the natives, which have been here, since the retreat of the last ice age, roughly speaking, and the exotics, which have been brought in. So, some examples: the mighty English oak, our favourite tree. We all like this one. The splendid Sitka spruce, which foresters love. The rare and smelly Plymouth pear. Ever come across one? Probably not, but it's one of our rarest native tree species. So lots of different diversity that these pests and pathogens could affect. Okay, let's get into the data. So once we've stripped out all the crop pests and diseases, we're left with about 636 pests and pathogens of trees. 466 of those are currently thought to be absent from the UK. So some are already here, but they haven't fully saturated the UK. Okay. This shows you the numbers of pests and pathogens of trees on different species of trees, whether they are exotic, naturalized. So those are things like, let's say, horse chestnut, which was imported by the Romans, but we kind of consider it to be native, and the native trees, so I think the blue are the softwoods, and the green are the hardwoods, and this is for the absent pests, and this is for all pests. So for some tree species, there are many, so hundreds of pests and pathogens could affect them according to the data. Okay, known host range. For some, it's not so many, but there is a queue of dangerous organisms waiting to attack the different species. Tree species. This one tells you the number of trees which are affected by different insects, fungi, viruses, etc. It gives you a spread of the kind of the host range of those different organisms. Okay, so we've got a lot of potential impact here. Right, this shows you the 75 tree species and the this risk rating, which is the likelihood and times the impact. So without looking too much at the detail, the further we are to the right, the more impacted the tree species are, and the bigger the dot means the more pests and pathogens which have been given that risk score. And I've ranked them by the kind of median risk score. So what we can see is things like cherries, pines, apples, pears, oaks, and spruce. tend to have more and more impactful pests and pathogens which could potentially attack them, whereas things like cypress, lime, hornbeam, sequoia, and something called the alder buckthorn have fewer and less damaging, impactful pests and diseases. Okay, and that's the mitigated and unmitigated. But there's a lot of variability, but some more threatened, some perhaps less threatened. So now we get to this point of trying to convert it to a quantitative risk and impact. So going back to the ash dieback, what we can say is that if we say a score of 5 means a very likely arrival and spread across the UK. So remember, ash dieback spread through the UK within about 5 years. And the impact is very high. So we know it probably kills between half and all of the trees that are affected. We can give it a range for both likelihood and impact of between half and 1, so a midpoint of 0.75. And then what I've very simply done is for every step down the ladder is to halve the probability and impact. Okay, so we're just basically the midpoint just halves. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense. So we can convert that to a long-term probability of arrival. Okay, so using the 0.75, so 3/4 and 3/8, etc. We can just use probability theory to look at the long-term probability of arrival and spread through the UK for the different risk scores. Okay, so that just reminds us that trees live for a long time. So even if there's a low chance of it arriving within 5 years, by the time you get to 25 years, the chance obviously goes up. We can then multiply the probability of arrival in 25 years by an estimate of the damage that's done. Okay, and that gives us the expectation of loss. So as you go up the arrival probability score or arrival probability and the impact, so that's the damage done, percentage loss, your total expectation of loss increases. So what happens if more than one of these pests and pathogens arrive and attack the same tree species? So we could start off with a healthy tree with 100% remaining. Pest A arrives, which causes 10% loss. That means you've got 90% of your productivity, your tree population, your biomass left over. If another one arrives, let's say that the effect is independent. So you lose an additional 25% of what's remaining. So those two together take you down to 67.5% remaining. Add another pest C, pest D, pest E, and we just multiply up those expected losses. What does that get you to if we multiply everything, the expected losses, over the next 25 years together? What we find is that for most trees under that scenario, the loss is complete. Just let that sink in. Under that scenario, if we assume that the effects of pests and pathogens are independent, may be different. It may be that having 2 attacks at the same time is actually worse. They kind of is synergistic. Could be worse. Could be that it's they're once you've had got one disease, the next one doesn't actually do much more damage. So there's some flexibility. If we take the scenario that I've just outlined, most trees end up with 0 production remaining in 25 years. We might want to be less pessimistic. So what we can do, and this I think is where the sliding scale in the model comes in, I think, is to scale down our kind of midpoint. So remember, we started at a midpoint of 0.75 for the worst case scenario, for the score, the ordinal score of 5. We could slide that down and take it to, let's say, 0.5 or 0.25 as a worst case scenario of arrival and loss. So let's say the ash dieback actually only causes 20% damage. We know it doesn't, but let's pretend it does, and we slide everything down. But at that point, we're actually only losing, let's say, a median of half of our productivity. But we have to be very, very optimistic in order for there to be much of a tree production system left in the UK, according to these data. Take home message: unless we are very lucky, most of our trees will get wiped out by 2050. But what are the major uncertainties? Okay, so what are the actual losses to pests and diseases? That's quite difficult to quantify. What I've found, and what's kind of known, is that there's a tendency for people to see a tree that looks a bit sick and just cut it down because it looks a bit sick. That tends to be the general response, or to do kind of controlled fellings to try and prevent the spread of a disease, which never works. Maybe if we left them standing, we wouldn't lose the tree so quickly. How do loss levels from multiple attacks actually accumulate? There's very little data on that. And should we then try and spread risk by diversifying planting and avoiding the reliance on a few tree species? That's something else that needs to be looked at. Right, how long have I got left?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, right, in the last 3 minutes, I'm going to show you something dreadful, something horrible. I'm going to show you the 3 horsemen of the tree apocalypse. So we've talked about ash dieback, that's bad, but these 3 things I'm going to show you, they're monstrous, they're horrible. If you see them, shoot to kill. These are the real forest killers that we need to deal with before all the other stuff turns up. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.